Citizenship. Many thanks to Dr. Paul Sherman, Ms. Olivia Bokidis, and Ms. Vidita Singh, as well as the University of Guelph-Humber for bringing us together through this virtual event. And I'm always, so grateful for those people who support such events, often working behind the scenes. And of course, to the participants, for making the time. So my talk today is centered on the discourse and practice of Soka, or value creating education, which is an approach to curriculum that emerged in Japan in the early 20th century, as well as education for global citizenship and sustainable development, which are UNESCO-led initiatives. UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. So to get into the first part of my talk today, I'd like to briefly introduce once again the three Japanese thinkers who, Paul had referred to earlier. So these are the Soka founders or thinkers who developed Soka, or value creating education. Based on more than 30 years of classroom teaching, Makiguchi published his work Soka Kyoiku Gaku Taikei, or the system of value creating pedagogy, in 1930. So today, as Paul mentioned, marks the 90th anniversary of the publication of this work. And I am so happy that we are able to gather here today to talk about Makiguchi's educational ideas and relevance. Today is also the 90th anniversary of the founding of the Soka Kyoiku Gakai, which was the lay Buddhist organization, Buddhist group, that Makiguchi established with his fellow school teacher, Toda. So Toda, as Paul again had mentioned, Toda and Makiguchi coined this term Soka to describe Makiguchi's educational pedagogy. Soka, or value creation, is formed from the two words so from sozo, or creation, and ka from kachi, or value. So Ikeda describes value creation as, and I quote him here, the capacity to find meaning, to enhance one's own existence and contribute to the well-being of others under any circumstances, end quote. So happiness is the overarching goal of education and human life. It is the experience of growth and fulfillment of one's abilities or innate potential that can be developed through the process of leading a contributive life. So, as Makiguchi says, and of course, I'm saying all of this in English, but they wrote in Japanese. So these are all, translated versions of what they said. But as Makiguchi states, and I quote him here, creating value is in fact our very humanity. When we praise persons for their strength of character, we are actually acknowledging their superior ability to create value, end quote. So value creating education is a learner-centered approach, and it is focused on the health, well-being, and happiness of each student. The concept of happiness that informs this approach is regarded as the ability to lead a contributive life for the welfare of oneself and others. So Makiguchi was incarcerated during a period of ultranationalism and the Second World War for his statements denouncing the emperor and the Japanese War. On November 18th, 1944, Makiguchi died in prison. This was due to old age and malnutrition. Toda, who had accompanied Makiguchi to prison, was later released, and he re-established the educators group, which included people from all walks of life. So not just Buddhists, but people from all walks of life joined the Soka Gakkai organization established by Toda. Toda's main concern was to rid the world of suffering through sharing a philosophy of life that could enable people to generate wisdom, courage, and hope to be able to better their own lives. So Ikeda met Toda at a Soka Gakkai meeting and has succeeded Toda to create Soka as a global people's movement through the establishment of the Soka Gakkai International and other Soka institutions across 192 countries and territories. There is so much more that can be said about these three thinkers than what is reflected on this slide. And today, on the death anniversary of Mr. Makiguchi, I would like to share some examples of his actions as a humanistic educator, his care for children, particularly the most vulnerable ones. And this was, while he was so sensitive to the dignity of each individual child. So many of you may know this. At Mikasa Elementary School, Makiguchi used his personal resources to prepare lunch for the children whose parents could not afford to provide them with one. So this was more than 10 years ago, 10 years before lunch was supplied in schools throughout Japan. I mean, Makiguchi did this out of his own initiative. And he would do this even though he had 8 members of his own family to feed. Did you know why sometimes Makiguchi would keep these lunches in the janitor's room? It was because children who really needed the food could get access to it without being seen or feel embarrassed. And I think, that's so amazing that he really sort of respected the dignity of the children. Due to the continued efforts of Makiguchi and Toda, the cases of children with skin diseases started to reduce considerably in the school, and the kids started to do really well. Several years of teaching by Makiguchi and Toda and their resistance to the indoctrination of students in a period of ultranationalism led to the development of the publication of Makiguchi's pedagogy. And I think, this has significance for many teachers today. Who suffer a range of privations, working in authoritarian contexts, but also in our context, in democratic nation states, teachers who are confronted by global issues such as narrow nationalism can really draw inspiration from Makiguchi and Toda and their many years of teaching and their resistance to the indoctrination of their students in a period of ultranationalism. So Toda's later call for the abolition of nuclear weapons and his vision to help build a peaceful and sustainable society has been carried forward by Ikeda and other youth of the Buddhist organization, the Soka Gakkai. Ikeda notes in his numerous writings that much of his learning was due to Toda, who mentored him. And I quote Ikeda, he says, through a curriculum of history, literature, philosophy, economics, science, and organization theory. So among his many accomplishments, Ikeda is a prolific writer and an institution builder. Furthermore, and I think this is really important, while we look at thinkers such as these for their, to draw inspiration from them as moral leaders, it's also necessary in some ways to draw inspiration from them as creative leaders and as radical people. So Ikeda, took action to initiate dialogue with people and cultures, including China, the Soviet Union, and Cuba, at a time when there was considerable hostility towards these nations. Ikeda mentions that this was despite criticism based on his stance as a Buddhist and his citizens' diplomacy. So here are a few points that I think are particularly relevant for the ongoing and future efforts related to Soka studies in education. The first is the importance of contextual and comparative studies. So let me explain by sharing from my personal journey in this field. So I grew up in Kolkata, which is now known as Calcutta, which is now known as Kolkata, the city of Kolkata. As an undergraduate student at the University of Delhi, I became interested in the educational ideas of the Soka thinkers. And this is why. As a student, I was so disillusioned by the education system that I had experienced in India. And this was in spite of the fact that my school and university were highly reputed institutions. I felt that the education imparted within my school and university was often divorced from students' lived experiences of their daily lives. And so I decided to study at Soka University in Japan, which is founded by Ikeda. In my first year there, I studied Japanese proficiency and then acquired my master's or graduate degree in education. So, although I really, wanted to just focus on Makiguchi's educational pedagogy and ideas of Ikeda, that's all I wanted to do at Soka University. But my Shido Kyoju, or my master's supervisor, Professor Kumagai, he was interested, that I do a comparative study that extended beyond his expertise on Makiguchi and Japan. He already was an authority on those topics. And rather than me just, do my dissertation on Makiguchi in Japan, he wanted me to also bring in, comparative dimension and look at Indian education as well. So that sort of thrusted my research into, looking at into doing a comparative study. And so my dissertation focused on a comparative study of Makiguchi and his Indian political leader, Mahatma Gandhi. I then went on to do my doctoral work at the University of London, studying the relevance of these thinkers for 21st century education in more detail. So, reflecting back, I think it was quite unusual for a young woman from India to study in Japan in the 1990s. And also, I think it is still pretty uncommon for PhD candidates to research the educational ideas and relevance of Asian thinkers in academic institutions such as the University of London. However, these decisions were guided by the intent to bring into mainstream education less widely known thinkers and perspectives that have shown to significantly influence the lives of people and communities worldwide. Now, how can we bring these thinkers such as Gandhi, Ikeda, Makiguchi, who have really influenced people and communities, how can we bring them and their ideas into mainstream education? This was my underlying concern. My point on the need for contextual studies is that these can be helpful to allow us to understand not only what the Soka thinkers themselves said, but also the context in which they developed their ideas. So what were their creative modes of thinking, and how can we learn from their creativity and courage that is relevant for our time? So in my 2008 work, I discussed their strategies, behaviors, beliefs as citizens, and its relevance for citizenship education. Further, comparative studies allows a dialogue to take place between the ideas of the Soka thinkers and other thinkers across geographical regions. And I think this can help to shed light on certain aspect of the Soka thinkers' proposals. So in a new book that I've published, I borrow from the dialogue between Ikeda and the Dewey scholars, Jim Garrison and Larry Hickman. Through their comparative work on the ideas of Dewey and Makiguchi, Ikeda, Garrison, and Hickman make connections between the terms value creation, growth, and character. Similarly, in my comparative studies on Gandhi and the Soka thinkers as Asian thinkers, so I look at them, Gandhi and the Soka thinkers as Asian thinkers, and through my study, the concept of value creation that I discuss is through the lens of non-dualistic philosophies that perceive the inextricable link between the self and the others. It reflects on the integrated view of life as suggested by the Soka thinkers and Buddhist philosophy. So just to reiterate, so when we compare value creation to Dewey, we start to understand value creation in light of terms such as growth and character. When we compare value creation to Gandhi, we start to understand this term in light of non-dualistic philosophies and the inextricable link between the self and the other, one's own happiness and that of others. So thus showing the importance of comparative studies, through which we can better understand the notion of value creation and, importantly, how it applies to our own particular context. One can therefore argue that the starting point to know more about Soka or value creating education should be determined by the particularities of where we are situated as readers, teachers, and scholars. So this includes looking for materials that correspond to what might be relevant to the values, needs, and culture of the students we teach. Again, when we're looking for Soka, materials on Soka studies, it's important also to see the educational institution in which we are situated and the culture and context of the country in which our institution is placed. I think these are the criteria for selecting what should be our reference point for Soka studies in education rather than an overarching criteria determined for this field. In a forthcoming article, I examine the alternative curricula in India using value creation as a lens. The curricula I refer to in my work, these have been developed based on an integrated view of the self and others. So in this article, I discuss that, while Western theoretical frameworks have been, commonly used in education practices worldwide, there are also important contributions to be made in using non-Western education perspectives. For example, to shed light on the emergence of ideas within given regional diasporas. So in this article, I examine how certain notions of interdependence have developed in Asia, from non-dualistic philosophies, and have informed curricula in particular schools within this region that subscribe to this interdependent way of thinking and living and being from non-dualistic systems of thinking. So moving on, value creation as a lens can also guide the current emphasis within research and praxis related to education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So let me share something from my own teaching. I often end with this Buddhist parable. And I do this to explain an important lesson, I think, from the study of Soka perspectives. So this story is called The Jewel Hidden in the Robe. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, there lived a man whose friend was a rich public servant. One day, the man visited his friend, who entertained him with food and wine. The man fell asleep. The rich friend, however, needed to go out on an urgent business trip. The friend who had given the man a priceless jewel did this because he knew that this jewel had the mystic power to fulfill any desire. But the man, the poor man, he was fast asleep. So his friend, the rich friend, he sewed the gem into the hem of the sleeping man's robe. The man awoke to find his friend gone, unaware of the jewel his friend had given him. Before long, the man happened to sink into poverty, wandered through many countries, experiencing many hardships. After a long time, now reduced to a state of sheer penury, he met his old rich friend. The friend, surprised at his condition, told him about the gift he had given him. And the poor man, he learned for the first time that he had possessed the priceless jewel all along. This allegory reminds us of the vast inner potential that exists within ourselves and others. For education, it means paying attention to not just the knowledge content, but also giving adequate attention to the institution's untaught curriculum or the school ethos that can bring out the learner's innate abilities and strengths so that learners can create value with their own efforts. So I tie this, this Buddhist parable to the Delors report, which is titled Learning the Treasure Within, published by UNESCO in 1996. That proposes an integrated vision for education. The 4 pillars of learning described in this report are learning to know, to do, to be, and to live together. This report continues to inspire thinking on education worldwide and has been critically revisited several times for fresh insights into ways of challenging education for knowing, which is cognitive, learning to do, which is behavioral, and learning to be, which is socio-emotional dimensions of learning. I would like to focus on two aspects of the treasure within as reflected within the Delos report. So the first aspect is that the treasure lies within the human being, the abilities and aptitudes that can enhance social and self-actualization. The second is the value of learning itself as the treasure, which has been championed as the right of each child by activists such as the Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai. Considering the second aspect of viewing education as the treasure, the broader emphasis is on developing societies that value and support the needs of education. If you want to have all kids get access to education, then we need societies that can value and support the needs of education. In recent years, much emphasis has been placed on project-based learning, theater and arts-based approaches, and the development of video games within the recent practice of global citizenship education. So these are really important. Experiential learning methods are a great way to develop learners' potential. But sometimes the goal might just end up becoming, how to make lessons enjoyable rather than the use of experiential learning to develop learners' critical skills. As well as experiential learning can be a great way to integrate values-based focus in education, that looks for a broader engagement with the existing experiences. It's not just about experiential learning in the classroom, but it is what are the experiences, values, needs, and interests that learners already have from their homes and communities, and how can we bring that into the classrooms, which is, of course, an incredibly difficult challenge. But where in our teaching can we find the space to be able to integrate at least some aspects of doing that? In engaging with youth through teaching within families and communities, the meaningful questions that become pertinent are: what motivates this youth? What enthuses her? What inspires him? And how can we captivate their imagination? And I think it is only through such questions that education for global citizenship can continue to place the focus on the happiness of the learners who are really the citizens of the world. So Dr. Paul Sherman, in his PhD thesis, borrowing from Burke and others, suggests that we should integrate education about global citizenship with education for global citizenship. I completely agree. And I think the question that scholars are also asking about education for global citizenship are: what are the knowledge, skills, values, and aptitudes that students need to compete and succeed in the 21st century? And I think I would add to that, and very importantly, what are the values, needs, and interests that we can engage the students with so that they can also live sustainably in the 21st century? These questions must become part of educating students for present local and global issues confronting us. Some urgent concerns for education in the 21st century, we all know this, are climate change, outbreak of global pandemics, societal upheavals due to technology, migrations due to strife or climate conditions, and the politics of narrow nationalism. So as a response to this, 17 Sustainable Development Goals were adopted at the 70th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September of 2015, with active participation by UNESCO. And of these goals, so the goal 4 aims to ensure inclusive and quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So within Goal 4, Target 4.7 addresses education for sustainable development, or ESD, and related approaches such as global citizenship education, or GCE, with the aim to foster global citizens who can meet the current world challenges. So the UNESCO initiatives of education for sustainable development and global citizenship have developed, quite interestingly, they have developed parallel to Soka studies. These UNESCO initiatives and Soka studies have developed parallel to each other over time. Some scholars have been interested to examine the relevance of Ikeda's work to the discourse on global citizenship education. For example, they have analyzed Ikeda's support as a citizen for the United Nations and have considered Ikeda's aim to foster global citizens through the Soka education institutions. So there have been some overlap between these two fields of the UNESCO-led initiatives of ESD and GC and Soka studies. Some overlap through the scholarly work that has started to emerge. So I bring together discussions, within both fields in my work, value creating global citizenship education. And, the basic premise of my work is that it's as simple as that a shift in paradigm and perspectives can enhance praxis or educational practices. So one proposal that I make through my work is that the shift in emphasis from a neoliberal paradigm to a value-creating paradigm can have significant bearing on the educational practices. So several scholars have launched a critique of the neoliberal paradigm, and these include, well-known scholars such as Andreotti, Bourne, Godelli, Terozzi, and Torres. So using value-creating approach for the three domains of learning as outlined for the practice of education by UNESCO could enhance education for global citizenship in the following ways. While we emphasize critical thinking within the cognitive domain, which is, I think, really important, we could also place a greater emphasis on dialogue and dialogic modes of thinking from value-creating approach. Within the socio-emotional domain, from empathy and consideration of others, we could also look at compassion and friendship. So the Soka schools in Japan, for example, that aim at fostering global citizens, have an emphasis on cultivating friendship and compassion. And from, in the behavioral domain or dimensions of learning, can we move from charity and advocacy, which is often found within, the practice of global citizenship education? Can we move beyond charity and advocacy to preparing learners for a contributive life? So you're not just, sort of these empowered citizens going to countries which are less better than ours or whatever it were, but really learning from each other, learning for a contributive life. So value creating global citizenship education is a pedagogical approach that develops learning for sustainable development based on an integrated view of life. It engages with the values, interests, and beliefs of learners and is founded on a trust in the learner's capacity to create value and meaning for self and others. So value creating global citizenship education has six themes for its practice that aim to promote a sense of interdependence, common humanity, and a global outlook, an awareness of climate change as planetary citizens, a commitment to reflective, dialogic, and transformative learning, a commitment to sustainable development through intercultural perspectives, a belief in the value-creating capacity for social and self-actualization, and an understanding that peace and nonviolence are central to the human rights agenda. So, of course, because of the limitations of time today, I won't go into the details of these six themes for the practice of value creating global citizenship education. All I would say is that each of these themes challenge epistemic assumptions, assumptions that we naturally make about learning and knowing within the current practice of education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So it challenges these assumptions and offers suggestions for practice. So, for example, my study draws on work by scholars that offer an early critical review of the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. These studies argue that although the SDGs are an attempt to build a peaceful and sustainable world, they are not an attempt always to build, they are not always built as being part of the international human rights law. This includes the fact that education for global citizenship, in educating for global citizenship, we need to ensure that no person or community is left behind. So wisdom, courage, and compassion, these are three constituent elements of a global citizen as developed in this book. This is from a study of Dr. Ikeda, as well as, of course, in this book, a study less widely known thinkers and communities. So these elements of wisdom, courage, and compassion are offered as three basic rights that need to be guaranteed for the learner. The right to learn from diverse knowledge and wisdom. The possibility of fulfilling one's unique potential, which is an inside-out and bottom-up approach that is compassionate and transformative and adapts to particularities. And the need to provide an access to education that has, that provides students with safe learning environments as well, to foster the courage to conquer prejudice and violence. So the discussions in this book argue that, we need to have education for social justice, but also for an earth-centered perspective, within education. So for example, a value creating approach advocates sustainable development based on the perspective of the interdependence of all life from a non-anthropocentric and an earth-centered perspective, such as advocated by the UN Forum Harmony with Nature, and as outlined in the principles of the Earth Charter. So I added the Twitter hashtags if you're interested to know about it and haven't come across these forums yet. I would suggest that they are great ways of knowing more about Earth-centered perspectives and how to integrate that in the process, into our process of education, but also within our daily lives. So of course, we must address the COVID-19 pandemic as well when we're talking about issues of sustainability and given where we are today. In many cases, the pandemic has not just created new inequalities, like we know, it has highlighted what were already there, the existing inequalities within our societies and the world. So in 2 of the 6 themes that I have proposed for the learning of value creating global citizenship education, I take the issues of climate change and COVID-19 crisis, and I argue that a study of these 2 issues of climate change and COVID-19 must be taken, with a sense of urgency. We must engage with these issues and try and integrate planetary citizenship as a cross-curricular theme and a whole school approach. I would propose under this banner that the study of human relationship to nature and its exploitation, risks like climate change crisis, and threat from global pandemics, these must be at the heart of education for planetary citizenship, as well as lessons from green economy and green schools must be taken as focal points of study. So my new book ends with a conceptual toolbox that lists 10 key concepts for the practice of value creating global citizenship education for sustainable development. The annotated bibliography at the end references, some literature for the practice of a value creating approach. rather than offer suggestions for a didactic approach or a separate curriculum. I know sometimes it's just easy to, to just have a curriculum that's all written up and one can take that and use it within one's classroom. But I think although it is more challenging, there are merits of using theme-based approaches that really allow us to develop reflective learning within ourselves as teachers as well as within our students. So to recap, value creating global citizenship education is taken as a pedagogical approach. The key focus is on building relationships between the individual learner and her or his natural and social environment. The aim is to expand the current focus in education for global citizenship from individual empowerment to bold collective efforts. I think very often when we talk about education for social justice, we're looking to really empower the learner. And my argument is, well, that's great, but aren't there different ways of, alternate ways of looking at what social justice means from different countries, cultures, and perspectives? And one of those ways from a study of Gandhi and Ikeda is social justice could be about educating learners to take bold collective actions, including, of course, individual empowerment. So, I'd like to end with some thoughts and suggestions for future research and work. Learning to know can integrate conversations on Earth-centered perspectives as well in our teaching and our daily lives. So for example, as promoted through forums which I had mentioned earlier, that includes the United Nations Forum, Harmony with Nature. Learning to be can be enhanced through notions of interdependence from alternative perspectives and paradigms of viewing self, others, and nature. It is quite interesting. I mean, I grew up, in India, and I grew up with a certain understanding, certain way in which I perceive nature from my own cultural background. And then, of course, when I, study the Buddhist paradigm that underlines Ikeda's views, you understand nature and the universe from this other, Buddhist worldview. But somehow we don't get to access that within the curriculum. So how can we learn from different notions of interdependence? And the Earth Charter does a great job of integrating the wisdom and knowledge and a sense of interdependence from diverse countries, cultures, and communities. So the question for learning to do can be about, well, are we engaging with studies of people who initiated bold collective actions to create sustainable communities? For example, Gandhi, Wangari Maathai, Greta Thunberg, and others. And learning to live together can be also about fostering people to be committed to leaving no one behind through the process of education and daily life. So in concluding, I wish, the Soka Education Research Centre for Global Citizenship the absolute best as it continues to develop initiatives related to Soka education and global citizenship. I hope very much to be involved in the important work that they are doing. And I thank you all so much for your attention, for your patience to listen to me today. So this is a QR code to my blog address, which is also mentioned on the slide. And I'll upload this paper there if you're interested to go back and have a look. It'll be there. I have a few copies of my book, which are available to present. So if you'd like a copy with a discount for your library, please send me an email. I'd love to carry on the conversations from today. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma, for your talk. Such incredible insights and such incredible perspectives. So now we're going to open up the floor, of course, via chat, because we have quite a few people joining us, which is fantastic. So if you have any questions, if you want to type them into the chat box, and I will read out your questions. So I'll give you guys a minute or so to do that. Okay, so we have our first question. It's from Victor from SUJ. So how does the true happiness fit into value creating global citizenship education?
Thanks so much. I think I might know Victor from SUJ. Uh, oh, here you are. Hi. Honestly, you should be answering this yourself, Victor. You have both the the theoretical as well as the practical knowledge. And I'd be happy for you to do that too. I'll just say a couple of lines. True happiness. I like the way you've added the word true to happiness. And you find that a lot in Ikeda's work, absolute happiness and true happiness, and in Makiguchi's work as well, relative and absolute happiness. And I think what they are trying to say is that absolute happiness is linked to really developing ourselves, as the best we can be as human beings. I think that's the kind of secondary source literature that's coming out of Soka studies in education. True happiness is also developing resilience. For me, it's developing resilience and hope. And the more I read the data that's coming out of the work that's being done on these twin global issues on COVID-19 and climate change crisis, a lot of the data is showing, especially to be more specific, suggesting for the state of Kerala in India, that the same tools that built resilience for the Indian state of Kerala in India to combat climate crisis and for them to take the lead in India in doing this, the same resources they are being able to use to combat the COVID-19 crisis. And I think true happiness has to do with this inner resilience that one develops through this constant self of engaging with the other. And that is the concept of friendship that comes out in the Buddhist use of this term, which has both the elements of, which is basically tied to the concept of compassion. The concept of compassion has empathy and friendship. And the Soka schools and the Soka universities stress on friendship because the other is always part of the process of educating the self. So please, if you want to share anything from your work at SUJ, I'd be more interested to listen to that.
Thank you. May I talk, Olivia?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, for a wonderful, insightful talk today. The reason why I asked this question is I have seminar students who are working on a group thesis looking at ocean literacy, oceanography. I'm an oceanographer, but ocean literacy with relating to SDGs and how becoming ocean literate can lead to individual happiness, and how protecting and conserving and protecting the ocean can be a resource, not only in SDGs, but also a resource to, what's the word I'm looking for, a channel to finding your happiness, or developing your global citizenship, or developing the concept of value creation in your own personal life. So basically trying to use the ocean as a context to develop value creation and global citizenship. And they're taking a twist on the concept of true happiness, because true happiness was, I think Makiguchi's original idea was education, also Ikeda, but that education was the means to realizing what true happiness. So that was kind of the context of my question. I'm sorry, I didn't really hear happiness as used in your lecture today. So I was just curious what your thoughts were on the word happiness or true happiness. Yeah. So I just a comment. Thank you. Thank you.
I used the word happiness. I didn't use the word true happiness, and that's a whole PhD thesis out there. Anybody who wants to work on Soka studies.
Anyways, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Victor, for that question. We have another question. What's your message to infuse value-creating pedagogy into the elementary and secondary sectors, especially in the Ontario education system? If you could speak to that.
That's a great question. I obviously wouldn't be able to speak much to the Ontario education system because I work in a very different context. So you're, whoever asked this question, sorry, I don't know the person's name, but, you're more equipped than I am. Why I again, propose theme-based approaches rather than a didactic approach to curriculum, such as, developed, there's this world learners course developed by Ramers and others coming out from Boston, Harvard University. And that's pretty didactic. That tells you exactly what you need to teach. And that's based on the IB curriculum. What I think is useful for theme-based practice, of course, I'm not the only one who thinks that it's useful, but in this field of, I think, value-creating pedagogy, I haven't seen any other. What I think is useful in theme-based practice is it allows for epistemic assumptions to be challenged. So, as educators, we have, this is what Bamber says. He writes in the field of global citizenship and sustainable development. And Bamber says that we have a predisposed way of thinking and looking at things. And those assumptions that we make and we take into the classroom naturally inform how we teach our kids about sustainable development and global citizenship. So theme-based practice that allow for us to challenge our own epistemic assumptions and allow for us to therefore enable students through discussion to challenge their epistemic assumptions can be very useful. And so I would say that, so that's where value creating education provides a lens by which to shift the emphasis from a neoliberal paradigm often found within the kind of guidelines you get from UNESCO for sustainable development and global citizenship education, which can be, by the way, infused across anything. I mean, you can be teaching history and teaching about sustainable development, looking at UNESCO and IB schools, for inspiration or for guidelines. But often what one finds is that they are using very neoliberal paradigms. And one of the very specific ways in which when I kind of point out neoliberal paradigm is this, stress on charity and advocacy. Whereas a value creating paradigm says, no, you've got to reflect on yourself, your own position, even study abroad. Who has access to it? Who doesn't have access to it? What about visa issues? What about language issues? And how these start to interfere, in haves and have-nots. So value creating education goes beyond charity and advocacy to having a dialogue on the level of friendship and equality. And of course, you can read more about it in the work that I've written. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you. That's such a fantastic question. And of course, if there's anybody else, any of the teachers that we have, any of the educators that we have who are online, who want to provide their perspective, having experience teaching in Ontario context, we would be happy to hear from you. So what I'll do is I'll ask a question perhaps in the meantime. So this is from Christine Campbell. In your work, have you found that Soka education theory has a unique key to unlocking the potential in students? So to contextualize, while training to teach in secondary school in the UK, I heard contemporary theories in education which did align with Soka education SGI thinking. But I'm thinking Soka theory must go beyond these pedagogies. If this is so, how does it work in the classroom, institution, and why does it work? If you need me to repeat that question, I will.
No, I get the gist of it, but if I, sort of meander, please correct me, Olivia and Christine. So thank you so much. And I think that's an amazing question. I would go back to what we mean by Soka education theory. So, of course, Soka Kyoiku Gaku Taikei is the pedagogy that Makiguchi wrote and published in 1930. And then there is Soka education, which is, so there's Soka Kyoiku Gaku Taikei, and then there is Soka Kyoiku, which is Soka Education, which has been developed by Ikeda. So I guess when we, sort of look at what does Soka Education mean in terms of its theoretical underpinnings, we go back to Makiguchi, but then we also look at the lectures and proposals, that Ikeda gives. And within the secondary source literature that has been emerging, I think most of us have not been really wanting to, define what it is meant by Soka education. But it is a general sense of the quote that I used from Ikeda that allows for learning to take place in a way that is for the happiness of the learner, and happiness means leading a contributive life. How do we unlock that potential? This is where I think, yes, Soka does go beyond, certain aspects. And Ikeda talks about it in his To My Dear Friends. He says that when we encounter something new, we often try to understand it through our own predisposed lens, that we are used to seeing things by. And Soka does propose something an extraordinary. It's pretty an extraordinary in the way that it is not just about empowering the individual, it is also empowering based on this philosophy of dependent origination. And what that philosophy means is that, what that philosophy subscribes to is that this inextricable link between the self and the other is integral to how education can take place within the classrooms. In terms of unlocking the potential, it's not just about the potential of each individual in isolation of the other. This is so easy, but at the same time, so complex. And I would suggest studying some of the literature that's emerging on the Soka institutions, but also the secondary source literature that's emerging on scholars that have gone and talked to teachers who are self-described Soka educators. What are they perceiving? What are they doing within their classrooms? And they're doing a whole lot of things to enable kids to live in this sort of contributive way, based on what Ikeda says, the greater self. I would suggest going there because it is such an easy, but such a there's so much going on in this field that I won't honestly do justice to respond to this question in just this short time that we have right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions or perhaps any comments?
I just have one comment, Olivia.
Yeah,
It's
please,
Victor
Victor.
again. I really liked Dr. Sharma, how you used the word lens today, perception or perspective. I thought the use of the word lens in your talk was really like right on, in how as educators how we can really I guess share and empower, as you just mentioned, value creation and global citizenship. I just thought you did a wonderful job today. I mean, I really learned a lot. Thank you. Lens was really nice. Just a comment.
I appreciate that so much, Victor. I really do. One of the other words which I again, this is. Yeah, one has to be so humble about where you learn so many things from. I learned about shift in emphasis. I learned this phrase in my studies in UK. And so when I was a student in Japan, it was about being bright-eyed and, oh my God, I've discovered this amazing theory and I'm going to tell the whole world about it. Let's go and talk to people about Soka education, whatever that means. When I went to the University of London, my PhD supervisor was like, okay, I don't think that's how a PhD is done here. You'll have to do a critical analysis. But what I learned over there also was that what does it mean to place an emphasis on something? So it's not just about coming up with this, Christopher Columbo is coming and says, I've discovered this country. it's having the humility to say there is all this amazing stuff happening. There is individual empowerment, and I think that's great. But I think there can also be a shift in emphasis. In my classroom, I'd like to foster collective learning, contributive learning. And so I'm going to teach history in a different way this semester. A shift in emphasis from individual empowerment, which was the focus of my social justice lesson last semester, to this semester when my focus is social justice through fostering for bold collective actions. So I'm going to draw in these other thinkers that talk about that.
Good. I just wanted to make a comment. First of all, Namrata, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. I think you've exceeded what we expected for our third special lecture. So thank you very much. You've raised the bar quite high for our fourth one next year. One of the things that I've struggled with as an educator and as a researcher and as an SGI member is how to bring Makaguchi and Toda and Ikeda's ideas to the mainstream. So I really appreciate your comment at the beginning where you said it's important that we bring lesser known influential thinkers into education. I think as an educator and a researcher, I owe this to my students to not just sort of regurgitate the same theories over and over again. Piaget, Montessori, Vygotsky, you all know them. And so that's why it's important to teach students about other theorists who are lesser known, who also have an important perspective. And it's up to the students to decide what they think about that perspective and if they can gain value from it. So I wanted to thank you for that comment.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I see you have two bright young women in this, as part of your group. I quoted two young women, if you notice, Malala Yousafzai and Greta Thunberg. And I think in many ways, young women are really going to open the doors, for the future, of course. No disrespect for us women and the men and the young men and all that. But I do feel that it's less widely known perspectives and people, but it's also the young women, another group waiting to take us into the future.
That's a great comment. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I have another question from one of our GH students. So you mentioned lunch programs, as I understand it. Soka takes a holistic approach to education and learning. I'm wondering about the ways that Soka Education addresses student context and disparities, and how that can be integrated into other educational systems. Such a good question.
Fantastic question. Fantastic question. And I think, sorry, I don't know who asked this question. I'm not looking at the chat box. Thank you so much for this question. I think this is an area I would say a lot more research needs to be done in the field of Soka studies, because this goes back to the notion of human revolution, which is great. It's about, the individual changing and therefore the society changing. But we also need to look at institutional structures. How Soka institutions established by Ikeda, are they really reflecting Ikeda as that citizen that I talked about? So not just Ikeda as this moral person. So let's learn about the concept of human revolution. But let's look at Ikeda as this radical creative person who goes as a citizen's diplomacy, who goes off to Cuba and Soviet Union and China. Are the institutions that Ikeda has set up, are they also committed to removing inequality and inequity at a structural level? I think we need to do more research in this area. I haven't done any research in this area, I don't think, and I don't think I have read any. But if you're up to it, whoever asked this question, this is a very important next step to take.
Thank you.
Hello, can I just make a comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, my name is Atala. I posed a question about the Ontario education system. I am an educator myself. I am a K-12 Ontario educator and also an SGI member. And I love the comment that you just made about really starting to remove barriers, especially for the disparities of students across the different panels. And I also love the comment, I believe his name is Professor Paul from Guelph University, I believe that's him, about how can we really make students kind of think outside the box and look at other thinkers and other philosophers, especially at the elementary and secondary panel when everything is so prescribed, so still so colonial, so westernized, like the systems is still so patriarchal and things like that. So my particular job, my portfolio includes I'm a teacher consultant that really focus on supporting the families of newcomers and supporting teachers in preparing programming for students whose first language is other than English. So I do see all these disparities in the system that as soon as the students do not speak English as their first language, they automatically become with a deficit rather than with a lot of assets because English is not their first language. And as educators, we tend to start kind of putting them outside the box and seeing them as that they don't have enough to really acquire the knowledge, especially in the Ontario curriculum. So I would love to dig a little deeper on some of your research and if any other, any other recommendations, especially to start removing some of those barriers so all the students have equal opportunities to education, of course, with our value from SGI and all the funders of the SGI. So thank you so much. I feel really honored to be a part of this conversation tonight, and thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you again.
Thank you so much, Atala, for your feedback.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts, any other comments or questions?
Can I just add something? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I just want to say how much I appreciate all of this discussion and your expertise, Dr. Sharma. I have just realized how much the COVID-19 issues has highlighted how that education isn't just providing content and learning in an academic sense, but also the care of students, that aspect of how Makaguchi provided not just lunches, but how he provided lunches to the poorer students. In a sense that reflects on how we all need to care for the physical well-being of students, and like that element of care is so vast within education. It's not just about academic achievement, but also literally the well-being of the students and every student. So kind of this does relate to the topic, I hope, but it's just something that's come to light in the discussion for me, actually, just now.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Christine, so much. And this is one of the things I think that is so valuable about discussions like this is how we're able to create these connections between the experiences we're seeing now with COVID-19 and connections with the educational sort of challenges that we're experiencing. And so to have an opportunity to meet, though it's virtually, we're able to dialogue about these things, which is fantastic. So I've got a few more questions in the chat. So this is from Mariana. In this time of COVID-19, when children, young adults are learning so much online, is this not a time when the students could be encouraged to be involved in their communities along the lines of Mr. Makaguchi with suggests in value creation? It would help them see themselves as contributors to their society.
Absolutely. I mean, you can ask this question because maybe you're on the better side of the border right now. Where we are, it's just been so crazy. We had new restrictions again come into effect today in Michigan, where I am situated. Schools, universities have again shut down. And again, so bars and restaurants and so on. Again, it depends so much, in terms of the community as well, in which the kids, in which the school is placed, in which we are fostering the kids. So I think it would really depend on where you are situated in this world, and whether or not you could harness that important aspect of education within the community, which of course is what Mr. Makiguchi wanted, for it to happen. But if you're in the US, where I am right now, I don't think you want to risk that, because people aren't obviously taking care of themselves, and because of, our sort of government, and fortunately out of this soon.
Thank you. I have a few more questions here. So of course, there's thanks, Dr. Sharma, for an inspiring presentation. So this is from Emmanuel. I'd like to hear you talk about what would be, in your opinion, key elements to foster resilience in learners in light of your research and experience.
That is, that is really, really at the heart of, Soka education, I think. I think it's not just one thing. I think it requires multiple level of doing and being to foster resilience. So one of the things that I talked about was, how you could use these three elements of a global citizen, the wisdom, courage, and compassion within your classroom. So learning from different wisdom, let's not underestimate that. So in this new book, I talk about, we know about some, sort of common stories for pre-K kids across the world. I grew up with some of these Western stories, but how much do we learn about the Jataka tales, or Daisaku Ikeda's stories, or Panchatantra, that also talk about building resilience, and care for the other, and hope, and fortitude, and so on. So from pre-K itself, how can we integrate wisdom in a way in our classrooms, in the whatever little space that we get between, with all the heavy teaching workload and restriction of time? How can we integrate courage? So what are the school policies, that can provide a more safe learning environment? How can we take our government to task so that the kids grow up, in a safe context in the nation itself? And then is compassion. How can we foster friendships within the classroom? I think resilience to me is tied to these three attributes of a global citizen: wisdom, courage, and compassion. And how these elements can be integrated into our own classroom teaching, pedagogy, most importantly, into our own sense of being and becoming. What are our own values that we bring into the classroom from our home and community? And I'm just going to end with one more thing. And I think it's such an important question, the question of resilience, because when we look at climate change, I start by writing, climate change is a reality. Because in the US, it's often not. Our kids might come from homes and communities in which it's not perceived to be a reality. We have to start from that point. And there are work, by amazing people. They've written on this topic of how to include such children, such kids that come from such families and communities that don't believe in such global issues such as climate change. How do we include them into the discussions and their values and their understandings? I think looking at, other people who've written for elementary and secondary school teachers, looking at their work also is important when we look to develop resilience from a value creating perspective. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma. I want to just make one point. This is from Gurja. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that properly. She just wanted to share that she's currently taking a master's in education, and she mentioned value creating pedagogy to her professor, who is now aware and is looking to explore it further. So that's fantastic. We have one final question before we wrap up, and this is from Anne. Sorry, I'm losing this here. So how will Soka education theory benefit or support students with disability, be it physical or mental disability, with respect to whatever diagnosis and or disorders that they may have.
This is such a, I'm really humbled by this question, honestly. I'm really humbled by this question. And I, even for the Zoom conference, I was thinking, finally, when I attend these UNESCO Zoom conferences, I see that a lot of, sign language is now available and accessible. So unless you have all the faculties necessary to be able to partake or have this conversation, you can't really participate in this particular event, right? At this particular event. And we're not still, even in the most developed countries, we're still not equipped in many ways to include, people with various forms of disabilities. So I think as societies, first of all, I'd mentioned, and that was really from Ikeda's work, that we need societies to build education that support the needs of education, to support the needs of disabled kids, kids with, disabilities. We need to have the education that is appropriate for them, that really, supports them. But for that type of education, we also need the society that supports the education. And I think I myself have not, honestly, I'll say with the humility, I have not done any major work in this area. It's just something I've been mindful of, for example, for the Zoom conference. And I'd love to see more research come out in this area. But to whoever asked this question, let's continue the dialogue, because you might be working in that field. I have the theoretical knowledge, and you definitely have the practical experience. And I think the SERC-GC, however you call it, the Soka Education Research Centre for Global Citizenship, is a fantastic forum in Canada that can take on board your suggestions and initiate dialogue around issues you think are not being represented enough in our society.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask one final question. I'm sorry, I know there's a couple questions coming into the chat, but I don't want us all to get kicked out. So I'm going to ask, this question's from Afifa. So Dr. Sharma, this is one of our research assistants with the SERC-GC. What would your advice be for us students to help support educators who hope to introduce Soka education teachings and methods into the classroom?
That's a fantastic question. That's really a fantastic question. I would say, and I have been saying this to one of the doctoral students who's working in this field, is that please challenge the dominant narratives. There is a tendency in every field for certain dominant narratives to start to emerge. And unless young people, students, young scholars start to challenge those, even within the new field of Soka studies in education, we won't be able to advance. So it's about learning and dialoguing, but it's also about challenging.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So I hate to do this, but I am going to wrap up the Q&A portion, our event. And I do just want to say, on behalf of Paul, on behalf of the SERC-GC, on behalf of the University of Guelph-Humber, how thrilling this last hour was, and what your talk, Dr. Sharma, covered. I have to say, and I think I briefly mentioned this earlier, the word that I think best sort of encapsulates what went on here this evening is connection and is relationship. For one, there's the obvious, we're all able to connect with one another, though it's virtually. We wouldn't have been able to come together if it wasn't because of this forum, but also to just the connection you make between value creating education and global citizenship, which we know Ikeda talks about, the connections that are created between topics like disparities and issues related to climate change and so on. So it's just when I don't think I can't love it anymore, then conversations like this happen, particularly when we're able to dialogue like this. So truly, thank you so much for all your insight and for your perspective this evening. And I also want to say a big thanks to all of you for participating and for joining us. Again, I can't say it enough. I think one of the things that I value the most about Soka education, value creating education, is the dialogue and is the opportunity for us to be able to connect the way that we have this evening. So thank you to all of you for joining us. Thank you again, Dr. Sharma. And we will be doing this again next year. So we will be in touch. Of course, that's a ways away, but we will be in touch to make plans for yet another successful special lecture. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Olivia, for moderating, and Vidita for sharing. Thank you. And of course to Paul and everybody here.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.